Welcome back to the Ice Bath Sports Podcast. I'm Matt, and I'm also the only one here today. Griff is away for the week, so he will not be able to record this podcast. I'm running solo. For those that celebrate Halloween, happy Halloween. You know what's pretty spooky is that this is episode 13 of season 2 of the Ice Bath Sports Podcast. So, the affiliation with the number 13, a little spooky. For those watching on YouTube, there is no video format today. It is just the audio version. But I'm going to jump right into the Week 8 recap. Dallas, right away, they dominated the Rams in Week 8. Dak went 25-31 passing, 304 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he did throw the interception, but you can kind of get away with that when you throw 4 touchdowns. He had a big day. They absolutely destroyed the Rams. Their defense was on full display. CeeDee Lamb also exploded. He had 12 catches, 158 yards, and 2 touchdowns receiving. He probably won a lot of your fantasy matchups this week. So if you had him, congratulations. I feel like he's been pretty consistent this year, but this is one of the first times he's actually, broken out and had a huge day. Somebody that hasn't had a huge day though for Dallas is Tony Pollard. He was once again a non-factor in the game. Despite playing 65% of snaps, he only had 12 carries for 53 yards, but he did add a catch for 2 yards. That makes it a little better. He's broken double-digit fantasy points in only one of his last 4 games. So those Tony Pollard, fantasy owners, should you be concerned? I don't know. It's hard because Dallas has such a high-powered offense, right? You'd think, and they've always been notorious for having a strong run game. The fact that Tony Pollard's been so inefficient the last couple of weeks, it is a little concerning. But I mean, I feel like there hasn't been a lot of huge running back games so far this year. We'll talk about one guy a little later that's started to burst out on the scene. But Tony Pollard is one of those guys that a lot of people have drafted pretty high, pretty early, and he hasn't performed like such. He had a decent start, but I mean, again, like CeeDee Lamb's been consistent, and he just had a big breakout game. Tony Pollard hasn't really seen that. For the Rams side of the ball, though, in the Dallas Rams game, Matthew Stafford left early with an injury, spraining his UCL, which is in the thumb. The update on him is he is day-to-day, but this could have a significant impact on Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. With that said, though, Cooper Kupp's already kind of been, how do I say this, not having the greatest season. He had a back-to-back great weeks. The last 2 weeks, it's worth mentioning, he's coming off back-to-back awful weeks. He's averaged 6.5 fantasy points in PPR leagues over the last 2 weeks. And what's even more concerning is he's played 100% of the snaps in both those weeks. So another guy that probably wasn't drafted too highly because he had that hamstring injury early in the year, but he's probably going rounds 4 or 5 in your fantasy drafts, right? And this is a guy you thought you were going to get back, and he was going to be, getting 20 plus points a game, but he started off with that. He had 2 back-to-back great weeks, but now, I mean, 6 points is that's just not good. And Puka Nacua was shut down as well against Dallas, but he's coming off a decent week last week. I wouldn't be too concerned about Puka Nacua, but Cooper Kupp, I mean, that's, especially if Stafford is to miss some time, I think that's really going to hurt Cooper Kupp's value. Moving on, speaking of quarterback injuries, there's a pretty big one. Kirk Cousins tore his Achilles. He went down late in the game versus Green Bay. He had an apparent injury. It turned out that this injury was unfortunately an Achilles tear. It's going to abruptly end Kirk Cousins' season, which he was having a pretty solid season. I'm going to look it up real quick, but I know they were just getting back to 500. They ended up beating Green Bay. They were at 500. They're at 4-4. He's second right now in passing yards in the league. He has 2,300 yards passing, 18 touchdowns to 5 picks. I mean, he was having a really good year. Really disappointing to see that happen to him. He was playing lights out. He was actually starting to turn the Viking season around a little bit. But it is worth noting the trade deadline is today, as I'm recording this. So trading for somebody is definitely an option for Minnesota, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the Vikings roll with a veteran free agent. Carson Wentz is probably the top guy on my list that's available free agency-wise. But Minnesota could also look to work out guys like Matt Ryan, Colt McCoy, Nick Foles, or even someone like Will Grier, who kind of had a good preseason with Dallas that didn't really make their team. But what does this mean for Justin Jefferson is kind of the big question. Jefferson, he's eligible to return next week 10. And the Vikings, like I said, sit at 4-4 with a reasonable shot at the playoffs. Aside from Detroit, they're in a relatively weak division. The NFC isn't exactly the strongest right now. They definitely, it's reasonable to say they can make the playoffs. But will we see Minnesota attempt to make a run at the playoffs by trading or signing a quarterback? Or, and they would also bring back Jefferson off of IR, clearly. But I also wouldn't be shocked to see them shut down Jay Jettas for the season and tank for a quarterback in the 2024 draft, which is loaded with quarterback talent. Kirk is in the last year of his contract, so moving on from him is 100% in the realm of possibility. Do they go and trade for somebody? I could see them maybe trading for Ryan Tannehill, maybe. Who else is out there that's really tradable? A lot of teams, Davis Mills maybe from Houston, but I don't know. I think they're probably better off getting a rental for the rest of the year, like someone like Carson Wentz, who does still have, probably a little left in the tank. Maybe bring back Justin Jefferson. You want to still sell seats. You want to still sell jerseys. You want to make that revenue. And I feel like shutting your best player down in Jefferson for the season isn't really the way to do that. And I did mention trading for Ryan Tannehill, but that's because, man, Will Levis had a great professional debut. It looks like Tannehill's probably out of a job, if you ask me. Levis put together quite the rookie debut, going 19 of 29, 238 yards passing, and 4 touchdowns through the air, while also propelling Tennessee to their third win on the season. Tennessee's now at 3-4. They've already had their bye week, but they're a game out from 500 as well. They definitely, if they could play like they played against, who they play this past week? Why am I blanking? Atlanta. If they could play like they did against Atlanta, they have a pretty good shot at, maybe fighting for a wild card spot. But Levis, he looked amazing. I was a big Levis fan coming into the season, but he possessed the poise of a veteran quarterback in that pocket. Speaking of the pocket, he appeared very comfortable in the pocket, and he also did a great job demonstrating his deep ball, which looked incredible. We knew a strength of his game was his deep ball going into the season, and going into the league in general. And that's kind of why a team would want to take a shot on him, especially Tennessee. And it was, like I said, it was on full display. He connected with DeAndre Hopkins for 3 touchdowns. D-Hop finished with 4 catches, 128 yards, and 3 scores. Levis is in line to start again on Thursday because Tannehill still isn't able to go. But even if Tannehill could go, I stand by what I said last week, is I strongly believe the Titans need to stick with Levis for the rest of the season, especially seeing what he did against Atlanta. He looked like a franchise quarterback. Obviously, it's a small sample size. It's only one game. A lot can happen in one game. Marcus Mariota had 4 touchdowns in his debut game. But just I can't get over how much of a veteran he looked like in the pocket. He commanded that offense. He was confident. We knew he had no shortage of confidence coming into the league, but some saw that as kind of a weakness, like he was a little too cocky. But I felt like it was, the perfect amount of, confidence he showed to be a quarterback in this league. And Malik Willis isn't really the threat to Levis as everyone thought he was going to be. He wasn't showcased much at all, especially after fumbling a snap early on in the game. Willis had a couple rushes, but he didn't have any passes. It was the Will Levis show, and Will Levis absolutely put on. He had a great debut, and this is a guy I was really high on coming into the year, and I'm pretty happy to see him succeed. He had a lot of doubters, a lot of haters coming in to the draft, especially with the off the field stuff like the mayo in his coffee or eating a banana with the peel on, if you've seen those videos. But I mean, this is a guy that he has the arm talent. He has the confidence. It looked against the Falcons like he had that, IQ that a quarterback needs. If he can continue to play like he did against Atlanta, he could have a really, really, really nice career. Moving on, let's talk about my Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles pulled out a late win over Washington. Philly looked kind of sluggish to start the game, though. The Commanders were actually up 17-10 going into the half, but the Birds absolutely came alive in the second half, where they scored 28 points, 21 of those coming in the fourth quarter. As an Eagles fan, I love to see this. Philly was primarily a first half team most of last year, but coming out and making adjustments at the half is a huge step forward for such a talented team. I mean, that was one of their biggest weakness going into the Super Bowl against the Chiefs, was just because they didn't make the adjustments at half that they needed to. And Hurts, he was rumored to have that injury all throughout last week. He did look limited in his game. He only ran 4 times and had 6 yards. Very unlike him. However, he excelled as a passer, going 29 of 38, 319 yards, and 4 touchdowns. A.J. Brown, once again, had a monster game, catching all 8 of his targets for 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. In fact, Brown broke the record for consecutive games with 125-plus receiving yards, as this was his 6th game doing so. He now has 60 catches for 939 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns so far this season. And, I mean, he's looked amazing. He's been lights out. Setting a record, no doubt, but having almost 1,000 yards at the halfway mark of the NFL, I mean that's pretty impressive. He's on pace to set a record, but so is Tyreek. But it's kind of those two battling out for most receiving yards in the NFL, and then there's everybody else. Devonta Smith also had a great day. He bounced back from a quiet couple of weeks. Skinny Batman put up 7 catches for 99 yards and a score. I wasn't really worried. I did think Smith was going to be involved a lot more in this offense going into the season than he has been. But I think that's due in part because A.J. Brown's been so dominant on the offensive side of the ball that, somebody's going to suffer from it. And it's unfortunately Devonta Smith. Devonta Smith, he's a great route runner, but he doesn't have that same deep ball ability that A.J. Brown does. And, A.J. Brown, he's a specimen. He's a beast. Devonta Smith's a lot more technical, I feel. But I think, we saw it this past week against Commanders. He's definitely going to get his own. But as long as the team continues to win, I don't think we're going to see, a huge uptick in Devonta Smith's usage. I think, he's going to consistently be inconsistent like he has been. Also, just to mention quick about the Eagles is the 2 new Eagles got in on the action as well, as Julio Jones had a touchdown against Washington, and Kevin Byard contributed with 7 tackles. As Kevin Byard continues to learn Sean Desai's defensive system, he's going to contribute a lot more. I mean, the dude's a ball hawk. He's only like 30. He's definitely still kind of in his prime, even if he's ending his prime. He's still in his prime. I've no doubt that Kevin Byard is going to continue to produce for Philly, and this is just the start. We did have moving on, we had some Week 8 unforeseen upsets. The Panthers took down the Texans, which was an ugly game, to say the least. What was it? It was like 15-13 final score, right? What was it? It was, 15-13. Stroud had like 140 yards passing. I mean, Bryce Young looked better than him in this game, although Stroud, albeit, has looked better on the season. it was definitely interesting to see these teams go at it. I mean, the way Houston's been playing, they were probably slight favorites, but I was just shocked to see the Panthers win a game with how they've been performing this season. But the biggest surprise of all was probably the Denver Broncos. They surprised everybody and beat the Chiefs 24-9. Now, that's very interesting as, Mahomes had 2 interceptions, no touchdowns. He threw for only 240 yards. Like the Denver defense, the same defense that let up 70 points to Miami earlier in the season, held the Chiefs to 9 points. So, it's definitely an up and down league. Any given Sunday, right, for the NFL. Russell Wilson had 3 touchdowns. Javonte Williams had a decent day. Denver, what are they now? What's their record? 3-5. Everyone that said that they're probably going to tank, I'm not too sure. Then they go out and they beat the Chiefs, hand the Chiefs their second loss on the season. And there was one other, I guess you could kind of call it an upset. The Bengals handed the 49ers their 3rd straight loss, and Purdy's continued to struggle. He's had 3 touchdowns to 5 interceptions in his last 3 games, and they've lost the last 3 games. This is a team that just 3-4 weeks ago everyone was saying was the best in the league, and now all of a sudden, there's a lot of question marks surrounding that team. And yes, they've been without Deebo Samuel, but I'm not sure if Trent Williams played this past week or not. But next man up. If I know, a significant injury like a left tackle or your wide receiver one can really impact a team, and especially an offense. But Brock Purdy, being this wonder child that everybody says he is, he's got to do better. He's got to perform better. He's definitely a system quarterback. We've talked about this on the podcast before, but the fact that he's been a liability as of late. All of his interceptions on the season have come in the last 3 games. He's starting to trend downhill, and he's looked pedestrian at best. All of a sudden, if I'm the Niners, I'm wondering, did we mess up? Did they mess up letting go of Jimmy Garoppolo to the Raiders, or letting Trey Lance go to Dallas and putting all your eggs in one basket with Brock Purdy? Because if this had happened last year, they probably and Trey Lance was healthy, they probably would have switched to Trey Lance to see what they got in Trey Lance. So that's just something to know. It's interesting that they put all their eggs in one basket with Purdy, and this is kind of how it's trending. And I just want to touch a little bit on last night's game. The Lions pretty much dominated Vegas. They played really well. And shout out to Jahmyr Gibbs. Gibbs followed up his breakout performance with another huge day, absolutely monstrous game. In David Montgomery's absence, Gibbs ran the ball for 26 times for 152 yards and a touchdown. He also added 5 catches for 37 yards. Despite only playing 70% of the snaps, which is down from 87% last week, Gibbs finished as the RB1 this week. This is the kind of potential that me and Griff, we're talking about when we were suggesting, people draft him at the beginning of the year, because you don't take a running back in the first round, especially top 12, unless you're planning on utilizing him. And this is the kind of utilization that we've been waiting for. It took several weeks, but, in David Montgomery's absence, Gibbs has been spectacular. He's been absolutely killing it for fantasy managers. He was RB3 last week, RB1 this week. Just fantastic all around. And I'm glad to see he's starting to pan out. Going into our Week 9 picks, first we're going to start with our Week 8 results. I went 11-5 last week. I'm now 75-46 on the year. Griff went 12-4 last week, picking up a game on me. He is now 74-47 on the year. I'm still a game ahead, but I'm going to jump in to my picks. Starting out, Thursday Night Football, Tennessee is at Pitt. I have Tennessee. I think Tennessee gets the upset here. Kenny Pickett has a rib injury. He's day-to-day. Mike Tomlin did not close the door on the potential of Kenny Pickett playing, but when Mitch Trubisky stepped in against Jacksonville, he threw 2 interceptions. He did not look good, and especially with how we saw Tennessee play against Atlanta. Will Levis, like I said, he's looked great. That offense just was clicking. It was explosive. It looked phenomenal. Pitt's offense, on the other hand, is not. And, Pitt definitely has the advantage with their defense. And, Tennessee, last week, Atlanta doesn't really have a premier pass rusher. Or didn't play. Yeah, Tennessee didn't play against a premier pass rusher like they will this week in TJ Watt. But I'm not sure this is going to be enough for Pitt to win. Pitt's got to score points, and I'm not sure they're going to do that. Especially Tennessee doesn't have the worst defense either. We thought when they traded Kevin Byard away, maybe they'd be mailing it in for the season. But all of a sudden, with how they played last week, they might still be in the running for a playoff berth. So who knows? But I'm taking Tennessee in the upset. Moving on to Sunday, 9:30 a.m. in Germany, we have Miami at Kansas City. Now, I'm going Kansas City here. Kansas City's technically the home team. But Miami, whenever they've been faced with a team, like a good team, a team above 500 this year, they've lost. Look at the Philly game a couple weeks ago. They've had a pretty soft schedule, and that's kind of why they've been so successful. I think playing a good team like Kansas City is going to be another slap in the face for Miami. And Kansas City's coming off a pretty bad loss against Denver. I think they bounce back here and win in Germany against Miami. But this should be a high-scoring game, no doubt. It should be a fun game. Pour yourself a bowl of cereal and, have some fun watching this. But moving on to the 1 o'clocks on Sunday, we have Minnesota at Atlanta. I think Atlanta bounces back. Minnesota obviously has lost Kirk Cousins for the season, like I was saying before. Atlanta, Desmond Ridder did get benched for Taylor Heineke. Heineke started to lead a little bit of a comeback against Tennessee, but they couldn't really get it done. I think Minnesota has such a question mark at quarterback right now. And, obviously no Justin Jefferson still. I don't think Minnesota's really going to be able to score. And Atlanta's defense has been pretty decent this year. But I like Atlanta at home in a bounce-back game. Moving on, we got Arizona at Cleveland. I'm going Cleveland. Cleveland's D has been really, really good this season. They did lose to Seattle this past week. But Arizona, I think they said Clayton Tune is starting this week, is what I read. Jonathan Gannon has said. But, you got a rookie, 5th round pick going up against Cleveland's D. I think this should be a field day for Cleveland. I think Cleveland wins by more than 2 scores. Next up, we have the Rams at Green Bay. Green Bay does not look good. They've really, really regressed this season. And it just feels like every game I watch, they've been worse and worse. The Rams, they just got destroyed by Dallas, but they're a better team than that. Stafford is day-to-day. I think their backup is Wolford. I originally had the Rams here, but with Stafford's availability up in the air, I think I got to lean Green Bay. Again, Green Bay hasn't impressed me at all, but the fact that the Rams might be sending out an accountant at quarterback, I don't see how I don't lean Green Bay, who, for the most part, is pretty healthy. Next up, we have Washington at New England. This was a game I flipped back and forth on. Washington seems to maybe have mailed it in. They just traded Montez Sweat to the Chicago Bears for a second-round pick. So, I mean, you're giving away a star edge rusher on your team already. You know, if that doesn't say fire sale to me, I don't know what does. New England, you know, they've won 2 weeks ago, right? This past week, they kept it relatively close against Miami. Actually, no, they didn't. It was 17-31. But I felt like it was a pretty competitive game, regardless of that final score. You know, New England isn't as bad as they looked towards the beginning of the season. I mean, they're 2-6, but I don't know. I mean, Washington has been up and down. So is New England. I'm going to go New England just because New England at home. You can never count out Bill Belichick. Next up, Chicago at New Orleans. Now, Chicago did just get the addition of Montez Sweat, which is pretty big, but I don't think that's going to be enough. Justin Fields, questionable to play. I don't know if Badgett is the starter again. I got to go New Orleans, especially since New Orleans they dominated the Colts, right? 38-27. If New Orleans can continue to play like that and actually, you know, utilize their offensive weapons to the best of their abilities, you know, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Michael Thomas, even Taysom Hill, you know, I think they can still have a shot at winning their division. Chicago, on the other hand, I think they're still focused more on building for next year, especially with this Montez Sweat trade. I don't think it's going to impact them as much this year. I got to go New Orleans at home. I think New Orleans is going to start to click at the right time here. Seattle at Baltimore. This, another game that was back and forth on. There's some pretty good games this week. I mean, Baltimore been playing like a top 5 team in the league. And, I mean, Seattle's also been winning games. I mean, they beat Cleveland, right? 24-20. And Baltimore, I mean, they won a close one against Arizona, but Arizona's been staying in games this year. I'm leading Baltimore at home. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see this go either way. Seattle has a really good offense, but, you know, I mean, Lamar Jackson's having an MVP-like season. I got to lean Baltimore. And next up, we have Tampa at Houston. Although this could be a bounce-back game for Houston, I think Tampa's been kind of on a losing skid lately. I think this is a get-right game for them. You know, they're 3-4. They win this game at Houston. They're 4-4. You know, again, that division, the NFC South is so up for grabs. This is a game Tampa needs to win. I think they get it done. And I mean, Stroud looked, you know, mediocre at best against Carolina, who, I mean, Carolina's defense hasn't been the greatest the past few weeks. They've been allowing like 40 points here, 40 points there. I got to go Tampa. I'm sorry. I got to go, Tampa. Indy at Carolina is the next game. Carolina pulling out the win versus Houston, like I was just talking about. But I got to go Indy. Indy's been putting up points lately. That offense is definitely, been really good, to say the least. But their defense hasn't really been able to keep them in games. I mean, they've had some back-to-back bad losses. This is a game that they could definitely win. Carolina, I mean, they'll be riding high from their victory. I don't think Carolina's good enough to win 2 in a row. Give me Indianapolis here. And now we got the Giants at Vegas. The Giants, another team that had a big trade at the deadline. They traded Leonard Williams to the Seattle Seahawks for a second and a fifth. That's another team that, is probably a fire sale. They lost Tyrod Taylor. Taylor, I believe, had a rib injury as well. And Daniel Jones' neck, he's been up in the air. They're leaning he's probably going to play this week, but I don't know. I mean, what we've saw of Daniel Jones this year has not been impressive. Man, this is a tough one. I got to go Vegas. I mean, because the Giants' defense has been playing pretty solid, but I mean, they lost a game they should have won against the Jets. I mean, going for a field goal late, it was poor clock management. I got to go Vegas here just because Giants coaching all around and their offensive play in general just hasn't been impressive. And Vegas, I mean, you got Max Crosby on defense. They just had a bad beat to the Lions, but with Garoppolo back, I think Vegas can probably score some points here. Giants just have been lackluster. They've had one of the worst offenses in the league. Give me Vegas. Now we have Dallas at Philly, probably the highlight of the Sunday games, if you ask me. I got to go Philly at home. I can see this going either way, but this is another must-win for Philly. I mean, they're 7-1 on the season, but with the next stretch of games, I mean, you have Dallas this week, then they have a bye next week, week 10, I believe, right? And then after that, a bye, and then they go at KC, home against Buffalo, home against the Niners, at Dallas, at Seattle. They have a tough stretch. You got to win the games you can, especially the games at home. Dallas coming off a big win against the Rams. I think you have Kevin Byard, has another week in Sean Desai's system. That as long as James Bradbury doesn't get burned like he did against Washington, I think this is definitely a winnable game for us. I'm going Philly at home, but again, Dallas is. It depends what version of Dallas you get. You get the Dallas against Arizona or the Dallas against the Rams. Well, I guess we'll see. It should be a good game. And then Sunday Night Football, Buffalo's at Cincinnati. I feel like every time these two have played, Cincinnati has had Buffalo's number. Buffalo also just really hasn't impressed me much the last, 3-4 weeks. I'm going Cincy at home. Cincy's been playing hot. They've been, getting good at the right time. They had a slow start like they normally do. But I think Cincy wins this game. They're home. Burrow's been playing really well. Buffalo needs to step it up this game to, stay in it. But I think Cincy comes out on top. And then finally, Monday Night Football, we have the Chargers at the Jets. I'm going to go to the Chargers here. If the Chargers can't win this game, I think their playoff hopes are probably done. They're 3-4. Winning this game would put them at 500. Kind of back in it in the AFC. But I don't know. The Jets, they're 4-3 now? Yeah. I think the Jets' record is a lot better than how the Jets have been playing. Again, they shouldn't have won against the Giants. That was on the Giants for poor clock management. I think the Chargers are just overall the better team. The Jets do have the better coach, though. Coin flip for me, but I think the Chargers, this is a must-win for the Chargers. I think they take down the Jets on Monday night. And moving on, we have the waiver wire watch. Only 2 guys on this list this week. Not a lot of guys out there at this point in the season. No running backs or wide receivers either on the list this week. Starting off, we've talked about him. I've talked about him most of this episode. It's Will Levis. He's coming off a huge game where he threw for 4 touchdowns. He seemed to have a great connection with DeAndre Hopkins. He's expected to start Thursday versus Pittsburgh, which will be a big test for him, but another big performance can earn him the starting gig for the rest of the season. He finished as the quarterback 6 in fantasy in Week 8, and his arm talent alone offers big play potential. If he can continue to protect the football and make accurate throws, Levis is definitely worth the stash, especially since Tennessee's next several games after Pitt are Tampa, Jacksonville, Carolina, and Indy, all winnable games against teams that have let up a lot of points to quarterbacks so far this year. And Levis is only owned in 8% of sleeper leagues, so he's definitely available in almost all of your leagues. Especially it's worth noting if you're in a keeper league or a dynasty league or anything like that, Will Levis is definitely a guy to go out and get. I mean, he's worth the risk. We saw what his potential could be with how he played against Atlanta. Again, a small sample size, but if he can continue to play like that, and I mean, he has weapons. He has DeAndre Hopkins. As of right now, he has Derrick Henry. Tyjae Spears, Treylon Burks. This guy could put together a pretty good offense in Tennessee and be a solid quarterback in fantasy. And the only other person we have on the waiver wire watch this week is Trey McBride. Now, Trey McBride was quietly the tight end 1 in fantasy this last week, as he had 10 catches for 95 yards and a touchdown. McBride saw a significant uptick in his snap percentage with Zach Ertz now on IR. McBride actually played in 82% of snaps and was targeted 14 times versus Baltimore. I mean, 14 times is ridiculous. You don't even see some wide receiver 1s getting targeted 14 times. I mean, McBride is now the clear-cut tight end in Arizona, and after a big breakout game in Week 8, he should probably be added to your team. He's only rostered in 30% of sleeper leagues, so chances are he's available. And a guy like Trey McBride, he's on an offense that doesn't have a ton of weapons. I mean, Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, and that's about it right now. I mean, Josh Dobbs, Clayton Tune have been, Clayton Tune's going to be the quarterback. Josh Dobbs has been up until this point. Clayton Tune, rookie quarterback. Rookie quarterbacks love their tight ends. And even when Kyler Murray comes back, which should be soon, Kyler Murray has proven that he likes throwing to his tight end as well. So I think McBride could definitely be a solid tight end going forward in fantasy. So you should look into adding him, even if he's a backup tight end on your bench. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap us up for this episode. Make sure you follow us on social media. We are at IceBath Sports on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and at IceBath Pod on X, formerly Twitter. And thank you so much for listening. Happy Halloween, and as always, stay cool.